Good afternoon, everyone. This is Diane Hank from OPWDD. I'm the Director of Workforce Transformation. I want to welcome you to our 16th MSC informational session. Just as a reminder, the first 15 sessions are available on the OPWDD website, and you can view those as well as download the slide decks, and the link for that is at the bottom of this screen. Any of those informations do count toward your current annual MSC professional development hours. I also wanted to mention before we get into today's presentation that on June 20th, which would be the next regularly scheduled MSC info session, we are not going to do the traditional noon presentation. Instead, on that day, we happen to have already scheduled a Medicaid Service Coordination session for the supervisors. It's one of the quarterly conferences. You do not have to be a supervisor to attend. On that day, it will also be web-based from 9:30 to 12:30, and all MSCs are welcome to join. There's a registration link there on the screen as well. I do not have an agenda on that for you, but it will cover and update you on all the things related to service coordination and the shift to care management under the CCOs. So let's move on. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today on our 16th session, Support for MSCs, a resource guide on enrollment and consent. So I'll hand the presentation over to Amanda Harper and Angie Francis from our Division of Person-Centered Support.
Thank you very much, Diane. Good afternoon, everybody. As Diane said, this session will cover the resource guide that was recently posted on enrollment and consent. This session, we're going to discuss the intent and the contents of the guide to assist people in the field to understand what's included within this document and how to best use it throughout the month of June as we continue to enroll people within CCOs. I want to take the opportunity to just acknowledge the work that's been done up until this point, that there's been tremendous effort out in the field to get people enrolled in CCOs. We're about 50% there, which is very exciting, and we just want to take the opportunity to say thank you for the work that people have done to make sure that the people we provide services for are linked, that will have continuity of care, and that they are linked to a CCO when we go live on 7/1. So thank you. All right, so moving forward, we just want to cover the resources that are available at this time for MSCs through this transition. That on the website, when you go to the main OPWDD website, you see the button for People First Care Coordination, and you'll find the following resources to assist in this process. There's the training in SLMS, transitioning to care coordination organizations, what MSCs need to know and do, and this available through SLMS, or Statewide Learning Management System. There's also a training on Medicaid in SLMS, and you'll find the MSC Toolkit, and the resource guide that we're covering today is available as a new item within the toolkit that hopefully everybody is familiar with. So within the toolkit is the brochure, the coverage chart, the scripts, the example scripts and FAQs, and the checklists, sample letters, and the videos of the information sessions that we've had. And these items, the resource guide is going to provide a quick snapshot of all of these items within the toolkit. So that is where you can find it. This is what the resource guide looks like. So the resource guide that was made available is intended to be really a quick guide for MSCs to assist out in the field with completing the enrollment process. So MSCs should print this guide and have it available with them as you're meeting with families and individuals to educate to enroll. That it's a tool that has the all of the items that have been made available up until this point to really help and have right at your fingertips what you might need to be able to review with the families. Okay, so within the resource guide, There's information on CCOs, and this section really focuses on what the role is of the MSC in the transition from Medicaid Service Coordination to care management. There's information on completing the forms for Health Home Care Management, so the 5500 and the 52 and 5201, all the health home forms that need to be completed for consent for CCOs. There's the consent for the Basic Home and Community-Based Services Plan Support. There's information regarding the decision-making process that outlines within the guide what is required to help somebody who cannot make a decision for themselves. There's information on how to complete the health home checklist and who should be completing that health home checklist. There's information on how to share the enrollment information once somebody has consented to CCO. So there's information within the guide on what should be done with that information after the MSC completes the enrollment process. And within the appendices 1 through 7 is information with the CCO coverage map, the RHIO matrix, the CCO contact information, the brochure. So it really encompasses everything that we've covered throughout the webinars and the trainings into one document that MSCs can carry with them as they help people through this process. Okay, so the beginning of the guide, as I said, touches on care coordination organizations and this transition, and we really want to focus on the role of the Medicaid Service Coordinator to make sure that everyone has a good understanding of what is required of MSCs prior to July to ensure that we have continuity of care and that everybody on your caseload is having the opportunity to educate to enroll in CCOs. So the MSCs have a critical role in informing individuals and families about CCOs. And the things that must happen is that MSCs must educate individuals and families on the care management options they have and the benefits of these options. The MSCs need to enroll individuals and to obtain consent for their chosen care management program, so whether they choose the health home service or the basic plan support. The MSCs need to manage the decision-making process for individuals who are not able to provide consent independently. If the MSC is transitioning to a care manager, he or she must complete the checklist for individuals who choose health home care management. And the MSC must share the documentation of choice, the consent form, with the care plan and to the appropriate CCOs. So those documents need to be shared once the person has made a selection, and we'll review, as I said, and it's covered in the guide how to do that. So this section also includes the sample individualized information letter and the CCO service comparison chart as a quick reference and reminder for the MSCs of what that letter was that is either being shared in the meeting or was sent to the individual that needs to be reviewed, and the service comparison of being able to easily reference that chart to describe to a family member or individual what is offered through the health home service and what is offered through basic plan support. Okay, so the section that reviews completing forms for health home care management provides a good description of exactly what needs to be done with the 50-55 for adults that are consenting to enrollment in health home, and the 5200 and 5201 for children that are that you're working with their guardian on enrolling in the health home program and consenting to sharing information. So these sections go through all three of those forms and the fields that need to be completed on those forms. We'd also like to reference that these, and it's within the appendix of the resource guide, that these forms have been reviewed several times throughout webinars that have been provided. Just want to reference, they've been reviewed on April 11th. There was a webinar for enrollment and consent decision-making, reviewed on April 18th. A webinar, Consent and Completing the Forms. On the 25th, we had a webinar, Enrollment and Consent, Answer to Your Questions. And on the 30th last week, there was another refresher on the decision-making process for CCO enrollment, which reviewed these forms. Lastly, the SLMS training that we touched on, enrollment and consent, what MSCs need to know, also goes through this. So within the webinars and the trainings that we've had, there's a lot of information on completing these forms. So please, if there's any questions, be sure to review those resources. And they're all listed, bless you. They're all listed in Appendix 2 of the resource guide, with a link in that appendix as well to take you right to that page so that you can review those sessions that are all within a half hour, and the PowerPoints are available too to skim through. Okay. So completing the forms for the Basic HCBS Plan Support is reviewed within the guide. And just to refresh, the individuals must consent to enroll in the Basic HCBS Plan Support Service Program if they choose not to enroll in Health Home Care Management to keep their OPWDD services. So if you're working with an individual that is not interested in consenting with the 50-55 or the other two forms for a child to be in the health home service and they receive waiver services, this option of Basic HCBS Plan Support should be discussed with the individual and family to ensure that they understand that they need to be enrolled in one of these services to maintain their OPWDD services. Medicaid Service Coordinators must obtain a signed Basic HCBS Plan consent form and complete the Choices CCO selection screen for participation in HCBS Plan Support. So that form needs to be completed and signed and needs to be entered into the Choices selection screen. And that is also touched on in the guide, and we'll touch on it within this presentation. Okay, so completing the Choices CCO selection form. Things that we want to highlight that are within the guide. On page 8, you'll find that there's instructions for if you try to submit the Choices CCO selection form and you receive an error that doesn't allow you to complete that selection, there are directions on page 8 that tell you what to do in that scenario. The instructions guide you to contact a mailbox that we've made available, CCO project mailbox at opwdd.sm, CCO project management at opwdd.ny.gov, I apologize. And you want to be sure when you're sending an email that you are including the individual's first name, their last name, their TABS ID, the exact wording of the error message that was received, and the full name of the MSC Agency and the MSC Agency program code and the program name. So if there's anything within those instructions that you're not sure about, please check with your supervisor or your administration within the agency to ensure that you're sending us the correct information so that we can best assist you to make that correction in Choices so that you can go back into Choices and enter that selection to ensure that the person has their selection within Choices prior to 7/1. So please follow those instructions on page 8 if you do receive an error message when entering the CCO selection form. Also on page 9 of the guide, we discuss that the most recent selection that you make in Choices is going to dictate that July 1 enrollment. So if say you enter in for somebody, that someone chooses Basic, and then they think about it and they contact you and say, oh, I think I actually want the Health Home Service. You don't have to contact anybody to make that change. You can just enter that selection anytime before July 1st, and that will be the most recent selection. So they will not be enrolled in 2 programs. The last selection that you enter will be the selection that will be in place for July 1. And people do have the option to change their service up until that point. Also, if you just make an error and you're not sure what they're enrolled in because you are not able to view that in choices after you enter it, feel free to just enter it again, that there's no harm in that the most recent entry will be the current service selection for the person you've entered. Also, 2 things to note is that when you're completing the CCO selection forms, that you can choose yes when answering if the consent forms have been sent to the CCO, if you know that you'll be sending the consent form to the CCO, or if you've given the form to your supervisor or any other point person within your agency for submission. So please don't hold on to these forms, that we really want to get them processed to ensure that this information is going to be within our system, and that you don't need to hold on to that you can select yes if you know that information is going to be passed on to the CCO. Also, we'd like to note that the CCO selection form will not be available in choices after June 30th, so it's very important that the first step is absolutely getting out there and completing these forms with individuals and families, but it's absolutely crucial that this information is entered into choices prior to June 30th, because the CCO selection form will not be available after July 1st. So please work with your agencies through the process that's been determined for entering this information to ensure that these selections are made in choices prior to June 30th. I hope I've emphasized that enough. All right. So managing the decision-making process for individuals who are not able to provide consent. And this is something also that we have covered multiple times in webinars, and as I referenced with the consent forms, that the May 30th webinar really went in depth on the decision-making process for CCO enrollments, and it's been covered in other previous webinars on April 11th, on April 18th, and on May 3rd. So again, in Appendix 2, it lists all of the webinars that we have covered, and there's the link to access it. So if you have questions about this process, please reference the resource guide in the Managing the Decision-Making Process section and look to those webinars that we have done. Just to emphasize through the person-centered planning process that Medicaid Service Coordinators should work with the individual, as you do today, to support and recognize each individual's ability to make a decision. And in the instance that somebody is not able to make the service decision for themselves, there are 3 situations to consider, and there's process to follow for each of those situations in order to determine who the decision maker should be and ensure that you're following the correct process to have that decision maker make a decision prior to 7/1. So we've absolutely had great work out in the field, and we've heard a lot of good feedback about this process being followed to a T, and we're very happy to hear that, and that's very important for moving this process along smoothly. And we've also had some feedback about there being some issues still with this process, and that decision makers are receiving inadequate information and that it's coming from multiple sources. So we just want to emphasize this process is outlined in the guide and through our trainings, but that agencies really want to have a point person that is reaching out to the designated decision maker and sending all of the necessary documents. So please review this information and make sure that you are following this process, and we will have some time for questions, so feel free to ask questions as you have them about this process as time allows at the end of this presentation. Okay, so how to complete the health home checklist and the implementation of CCOs, Medicaid Service Coordinators, who are transitioning into the role of care managers will be the ones to assist the current individuals on their caseload with the health home checklist and to educate them about the 6 health home core services. So just to make that clear, that if a service coordinator is not transitioning to a CCO selected by the individual, then they won't complete that. The care manager that will serve them at the CCO will be the one to complete that health home checklist. The checklist is found in the MSC toolkit and in Appendix 5 of the document and is designed to assist in ensuring that the necessary actions are completed to initiate the individual's smooth transition into health home. It's also to educate individuals and their families on health home services and just to understand the current service needs of the individuals and their families for plan development and service access moving forward. So again, just to emphasize, you'll complete this form if you're moving on as a care manager for that person in the CCO that they have chosen. You will complete the health home checklist. If you are not, you do not need to complete that checklist. All right, the guide discusses the sharing of documentation of choice, consent, and care plan with the CCO. As part of the checklist, Medicaid Service Coordinators are required to provide the following documentation to the CCO designee: the completed and signed original consent forms, the ISP, the Individualized Service Plan, the CAS, if it's available for the person, if they've had a CAS completed, the Coordinated Assessment System, or the Developmental Disabilities Profile, the DDP-2. Current and initial level of care eligibility determination, so the current LCED, and supporting evaluations for people that are enrolled in the waiver as those documents are available. So those documents need to be included with the completed consent forms. So as far as handling the documents, the CCO is responsible for maintaining that original signed consent that you have the individual signed. So the 2 instances, if an individual is selecting to enter into a CCO that is affiliated with their current MSC agency, then the enrollment forms can be retained by that agency, and the CCO will provide direction specific to what they would like done with their enrollment forms. When an individual has chosen a CCO that is not affiliated with their MSC agency, then the documents must be mailed to the appropriate CCO. And Appendix 1 of the resource guide provides that contact information to send the documents that were highlighted in the previous slide: share documentation, choices, consent, and care plan with the CCOs. So we want to make that clear, and again, if there's any questions on this, I believe we'll have some time at the end of the presentation to clarify. Okay, so just to review the appendix that are within the resource guide, the first one is the CCO contact information that we just discussed. The second appendix is all of the informational sessions that are available on multiple topics and the link to take you directly to those sessions. and the sessions are recorded through YouTube, and the PowerPoint presentations are also available through a link with those sessions. The third appendix is the informational brochure that should be reviewed with individuals and families. The fourth appendix is the CCO coverage chart to be able to determine what CCOs are available within somebody's county and region. And Appendix 5 is the care manager checklist. Appendix 6 is the RHIO integration consent matrix, so to determine which RHIO you would put on the consent form. And Appendix 7 is the CCO regional coverage map. So those are documents that, as we said at the beginning of the presentation, that MSCs should be printing this resource guide to bring with them into the field to provide education and enrollment, that these are the documents that you'll have available right at your fingertips. So it's our hope that this guide will be helpful and useful and really condense all of the information that we've provided over the past few months into one place that you can take with you and have easily accessible. So I believe we have some time to answer some questions, so we're just going to mute for a minute to review the questions that we have, and we'll be right back.
Hi, thank you for your patience. We were just going over some of the questions. So we received a question about the dates on the care manager checklist and what dates need to be provided. This information can be found in the MSC FAQ that was recently posted, but there are actually 3 instances on the checklist in which a date is required. The first is the CCO enrollment effective date, and for all individuals transitioning from MSC or PCSS to CCO, the effective date will be 7/1/18. For all new individuals enrolling in the CCO after 7/1, the effective date will be the 1st of that month. The second requirement for a date on the checklist is the date of the person-centered planning meeting. This is the date in which the life plan meeting with the individual and or his or her family or representative, care manager, and planning team members has been agreed upon and scheduled for. The third date is the date of the care manager and or individual family signature. The date that the checklist was reviewed and completed between the care manager and the individual and family is the date required here. That can be a face-to-face meeting or it can be a telephonic meeting, and the required signature and date is that of the care manager. Another question we received was when will OPWDD begin sending out information about people who have not yet enrolled in a CCO? The OPWDD implementation team is working closely with the OPWDD regional offices to coordinate any outstanding enrollment needs. Each MSC agency can look at their program enrollments in choices to review your individual rosters and review your individual enrollments. Another question was regarding if someone is choosing to opt out of all OPWDD services and how that is completed. The MSC 1 and the MSC 2 are no longer available in choices. However, the MSC 3, to remove an individual from MSC, is still available, and MSCs can complete this form up until June 30th in choices. Another question came in about what happens regarding enrollments after July 1. All CCOs will begin completing the CCO enrollment form in choices for any new enrollments into CCO after July 1st. Another question was, when do all of the documents such as ISPs, level of cares, etc., need to be compiled and scanned into choices? These forms need to be compiled and available to CCOs with the checklist. However, MSCs need to follow the direction of the CCO that they're affiliating with on when and if they need to be uploaded into choices. And in regards to the consents, again, all CCOs are providing direction to the MSC agencies on where to maintain those consents or how they're going to access those consents. So some CCOs are having them mailed, some CCOs are having MSCs put them together and they're picking them up on specific dates. So depending on your MSC agency and the CCO you're affiliated with, you must follow the directions provided by CCOs for the originally signed consent forms. Those were all of the questions. There's another question, what date does the required paperwork need to be submitted? All consent forms need to be completed by June 30th, and the CCO selection form in choices must be completed by June 30th, 2018. There's a question, do the checklists have to be signed by the family or can they be signed by just the care manager? The checklist must be reviewed face-to-face or in person with the care manager and the individual and our family, but the required signature is that of the care manager and would be best practice for the family and or individual to sign. There's a question regarding Basic HCBS Plan Support, and does this service require completion of the checklist? If an individual is choosing to enroll in Basic HCBS Plan Support, the checklist does not need to be completed, as this is a requirement for individuals choosing Healin Home Care Management. I'm just looking at any other questions. So I think that those are all of the questions.
The resource guide was also shared through the most recent advisory, but there's somebody asking about where they can find the resource guide, and that is within the toolkit, the MSC toolkit. So if you go to People First Care Coordination webpage, there's a tab on the left side for just follow information for providers, and you'll see an item for MSC toolkit, and the resource guide is within there. And this information will be, this webinar will be posted, and we can also do a link to the resource guide underneath the link to this presentation.
Yep, the recording will be posted within the next couple of days, as well as the PowerPoint, which you'll be able to print or save locally.
Okay, I think that's all of the questions.
Great. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for the information session, and we will have the MSC Supervisors Conference on June 20th.
And we just want to emphasize that everybody is really working hard and doing a great job, that we're very proud to be at 50% and keep up the good work. We have less than a month left, so thank you very much.